Welcome to Worcester Voices, a series of conversations with people who live, work, study, and create in Worcester. I'm Fiona Nelson, a student at Holy Cross. Each episode, a student host will chat with someone connected to Worcester to hear their story and learn what matters to them, whether that's a project they're building, a memory that stayed with them, or an experience that shaped how they see the city. For our second episode, I'm joined by Brett Iarrobino, an ELA teacher who works at Burncoat Arts Middle School. Brett, thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me, Fiona.
You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What made you come to Worcester and why did you choose to stay?
I think a lot of young transplants to the city. I came for school. I went to Clark University, fabulous neighbor of Holy Cross. And yeah, I stayed when I realized that I was learning so much more when I was not necessarily off campus, but when I was spending meaningful time off campus in addition to time on campus. And I think for me, the summers that I spent between classes and between years, I moved into my first off-campus apartment after my sophomore year going into my junior year. And that was a really sort of transformative moment for me and season because I was no longer on Clark time. I was in Worcester on my own time, and just getting a chance to take a breath and not be caught up in academics and worrying about submitting stuff on time. I was doing an internship with a youth arts nonprofit called Main Idea, which unfortunately is no longer in operation in Worcester. But that program and Joy Marietta, who was running it at the time, became these really important gateways for me that made me realize I kind of knew I would always be a teacher, but I was this is not just teaching the way I thought it would be. I'm learning so much from the youth, and realizing that was an experience that would only keep happening in Worcester, and other things that I did, things like the Worcester Refugee Assistance Project, being in Worcester Public Schools through some programming that Clark had put together, and really teaching and learning with youth in the city for me made me realize that when I was done with my student teaching year, because I stayed for an extra year at Clark to get my master's in teaching, I was this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I have so much more to learn still. And this has been home for 5 years. So let's keep hanging out, Worcester.
Yeah, that's so cool. Thanks. I'm glad you had that experience though with that summer internship.
Yeah, it's crazy how much that changed the game for me. I don't know what kind of culturally how often that happens at Holy Cross. I feel it doesn't even happen maybe as much with Clark anymore. That could be not true, but I just remember all of my friends that were upperclassmen when I was a freshman and a sophomore being you have to do a Worcester summer. You have to do a Worcester summer. And I was okay, I'll do a Worcester summer. And yeah, it was so fun.
How did you end up in the education field?
I think I always knew that I would be a teacher. I came to Clark in part because of that 4+1 program, where if you stayed for an extra year, right, you not only got a bachelor's, but you got a master's and you got your initial license in teaching. And that was always really alluring. I think going all the way back to middle school and high school, I think I was really transformed personally by my teachers, the best ones that I had. And I think I just don't know that I would have survived as for a while as a closeted queer kid, and then a queer kid that needed creative outlets, but also needed to see that those outlets are connected to literature, or they can be, right, and storytelling, and those lines being blurred by just great teachers who cared about what they were doing and cared about me too much to not give up on me. There were so many teachers that I loved in high school that I was kind of cruel to, or was mean to. I know, kind of mean to, in what I thought was a funny way. But I look back at it now as a teacher and I'm oh, it's not cool that I was ribbing them in this way. And this was totally a one-sided joke. But they stuck it out for me and cared for me enough to like be like along for the ride with me. And so, yeah, I think I came to Clark knowing that that was impactful and that I'd like to do that for someone else. But then really, like when I was talking about it with youth work sites like Main Idea, I realized that, and this is sort of like a thing that in theory, like is so much more pronounced in like critical theory on education, but I didn't really have language for it, but I was learning with the youth at the time, and I was learning so much about Worcester, this place that I had been studying but hadn't really been embedded in meaningfully before that. And I was learning about their culture, and I was learning because I came from an education system that was pretty homogenous, a predominantly white school district and a school district of affluence. And yeah, I mean, like that's not Worcester. Worcester is predominantly Black and brown, and as a school district and also as a community. And Worcester has a lot of different class diversity, and the folks that I was doing that work with, both the youth but also the youth workers, Clark alum that had at that point embedded themselves in the community, again, like that patience showed up. Like I would make mistakes or I'd like show up inauthentically, and like no one shamed me for it. People were just like kind of taking my hand and saying like, have you thought about it this way? Or like, this is my experience with like the partying that happens on your street. Like, have you been to those parties? And I'm like, yes, I've been to those parties. Like, oof, I am potentially keeping students from studying their homework, like that live next to me when I am at those parties. So yeah, all those things sort of reminded me like, oh yeah, like teaching looks different here, but is still so important.
What influenced your decision to teach middle school and in an undergrad or graduate education program?
I'm going to answer this one, but then I want you to answer this one.
Okay.
I was also a teacher in a class of middle schoolers. After I graduated from Clark, I stayed where I did my student teaching for a few years in Worcester Public. It's called the University Park Campus School. It's an amazing school. It's kind of like my forever school, as much as I love where we teach now, Burncoat. And UPCS is 7th grade through 12th grade, which is pretty cool. I had never been in a school like that for a while. And I realized I would do predominantly, I was trained as like a 9th and like 11th grade ELA teacher. So I was working with, I was working with students that were really not that much older than me at the time, which was like definitely a power dynamic. But I realized, because they'd always give me a 7th grade literacy class, which was very much an enrichment that was different from ELA. And so I'd have to like figure out the spin that made it different. And it was hard. But I think what I discovered that I really appreciated about middle school is that there's this joy there. And certainly every grade and every educational space has the capacity for joy. But I think middle school, the capacity is a little bit bigger, and it's, I think, a little bit more prevalent because they're still so young. They're babies. Like, they're so little. In Worcester, 6th grade is the last year of elementary school. So 7th grade is really their first year of being a middle schooler and transitioning to high school. Oh, did you not know that?
Sort of. I mean, like I was kind of aware of it. I never really put into perspective that this is their first year in middle school, though. My middle school was 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. So I had a very different experience with that.
Yeah, mine was 6th through 8. But I'm always jealous of the people that did like 5th through 8, because I think that, like, this is kind of a rabbit hole, but like I think it's bizarre that in Worcester, we only give them 2 years in a building if it's not like UPCS, right? And it's a true middle school. Like, I think that to meaningfully build culture and community, like, they need to spend more than 2 years there. And so this is all to say that this age is very much in flux. And a friend of mine, Rachel Scanlon, the lights just came back on. Wow, look at that. Oh, Holy Cross is going through a power outage right now, for context, and we just got lights. That's cool. Rachel Scanlon, who is a Clark alum, Rachel says middle schoolers are old enough to talk to, but they're young enough to change. And I think that's such a great example of, like where they are at. It is very much like they are in between elementary school, they're heading into high school, and there's this great meme of, I should have looked up where it came from, but like we'll see if you can clock it. The meme of like the two people sitting in the back of the car, one is dressed in a business suit and the other comes in and like maybe is in drag, but is wearing like all these like really bright colors. It's like very clear that they are at two very different events or going to two different events. And the meme ends up becoming like this format for like one job or one part of life that requires a suit and one that requires like a bright dress with florals and feathers. And someone once made one that was like high school teaching in the suit, elementary school teaching in the boa and the dress. But I see it as both. Middle school, like I think it's beautiful that we get to teach them like how to format an essay in MLA and like wear the suit. But I also think that like there is like so much more laughter and silliness that we can get away with. And like they show us drawings and they're proud of the drawings. And again, like all of this can happen at any level. This is just a heuristic, but I do think that I see it more than I did when I was at high school. And so that's kind of what dragged me into, or what made me want to enter middle school.
Personally, for me, middle school, I had always wanted a teacher that was like at least there for not just academically, but for me personally. A lot of my teachers in middle school stress that like we have to prepare you for high school, and like yeah, they are right, 100%. I just wish that I also felt comfortable enough to like talk with like my middle school teachers and like actually like, you know, be open with them and like actually get to know them as people and vice versa. Also, in terms of teaching middle school, like actually I got to give credit to my mother on this one. She's like, it's a sweet spot. Like these kids are still eager to learn, but they're also still like in that phase of like, you know, becoming like, you know, young adults, and they're still learning and growing. And like, kind of like you said, it's not just like teaching them in the soup, but you also get to be fun with them too. Whereas in high school, I feel like you kind of lose that a little bit, I guess, which is really sad. Yeah. But I don't know. I feel like you're also preparing them for the real world, where in middle school, you can still kind of hold on to that, like, you know, I guess childhood innocence, like a little bit longer. Let's pick up where we left off.
Yes, we're back.
We are back. We had to switch some things around, do
Quick
the power
break.
outage.
Ad break.
You teach at the education program at Clark University.
Mm-hmm.
What do you teach at Clark, and how have you used what you teach at Clark in your own classroom?
Yeah, so I teach at the ed department at Clark, and I kind of have two different roles there that look not very different, but are working with two different student populations there. At one level, I teach, and this is what I've done for a while now, I work with we call them MATs, Master of Arts in Teaching students. So you have TEP, we have MATs, the acronyms of it all. And yeah, Masters of Arts in Teaching students are either Clark undergraduates that have since become graduate students for that accelerated degree program, the same thing I did. And there's a few Holy Cross students that actually, yeah, like who's your friend that's there?
One of my best friends and roommates. Shout out Erin Ledwith.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Erin, I know a few of them.
Caroline?
Yeah, Caroline Ober, Meg Ober's daughter, which is a crazy connection. Nate Ingalls, Grace Bermage. Yeah, so these guys are all in the thick of doing a really accelerated and tricky year of teaching full-time in a Worcester Public Schools classroom, often teaching multiple classes that they pick up similar to TEP. My job is each summer I come in and co-teach a seminar with the Worcester Public Schools teacher on best practices for things that they are practicing right now with a college access nonprofit that I also teach at during the academic year. It's called the Bruce Wells Scholars Upward Bound Program. It's federally funded by TRIO, and they've been at Clark's campus for forever doing with Worcester 9th through 12th graders college prep classes. And then over the summer, they stay in the dorms at Clark, and they sort of get a simulation of what life at college is like. And recently, in the last few years, we've had sort of a dearth of educators that are willing to teach classes for them over the summer. And then Clark used to have a summer program for the MATs to get a sense of what it's going to be like to teach and work with youth. It's especially helpful if some of them come in and have never worked with young people before, which is fine, but they couldn't get any like young people enrolled from Worcester. So like we at Upward Bound had the the scholars, the students, but we didn't have the teachers, and the MAT program had the teachers but didn't have the students. So one day, the program directors, who I'm kind of familiar with, both of them were like, you know both these worlds, come do this work. And this will be the 4th year, I think, that I've come in, and for between like late June to like early August, run like a 6-week sort of teaching boot camp intensive for graduate students, which is very joyful and very fun, and always ends up being a really meaningful experience for everyone. And then, I mean, like, think about it this way. It's sort of like if you had taught classes like with Burncoat Middle School youth, like incoming into the 7th grade, you would then see them when you go to classes, and like you'd have those relationships with a few of them that were enrolled going in. So it ends up being a really great sort of training ground, a place for them to get some social capital before they go into the building. And
yeah, that's great. Oh my gosh. That's so cool.
thank you. It's a lot of work.
I'm sure.
It's so fun. I kind of get to be like an administrator sort of, which is cool and different from teaching. I also recently started working with, so Clark doesn't have in the ed department like an education major, or like a license for when you're at your bachelor's level, but we do have a major in community youth and education studies. And certainly future teachers do it. It's not a prereq to do the MAT program. But what I love about the CS program is that it's really a space for Clark undergrads who know that they really care deeply about working and learning with young people, but aren't necessarily committed to doing it in a classroom, because teaching's not for everyone. And there are lots of meaningful careers you can have with youth that don't involve a classroom ever, right? Like I think a lot about social workers and youth organizers and out of school time spaces. And we as teachers have so much to learn from those spaces. And I think those are always really great sort of future youth workers and organizers that are entering that program. And so as a doctoral student at Clark, I am working a lot with those classes as a course assistant, supporting the full-time faculty that are there and trying to support the undergraduates as they go to write their theses, which they do at a school site that's somewhere, or perhaps not a school site. It should be called a community site. I misspoke there. And at the community site, they work with some kind of existing program, or maybe they help make their own, and they do community engaged research that they then write their thesis about.
Is this what your office hours are for?
Yes, this is why I'm always running away after I teach on Wednesdays to go run office hours. There's a collection right now. I'm supporting a junior class of CS students that are all in like the early stages of figuring out what their theses will be. And there's a collection of juniors. Shout out to Annie and Morgan, if you're watching. They're always in my office, and it's so fun and joyful. It feels so good to be around undergraduates like you all the time who are interested in teaching, because I learn so much from y'all, and your energy and your joy for the job is pretty irreplaceable. It feels really good to be around that.
Worcester is an urban school district.
Mm-hmm.
For our listeners, could you explain what an urban school district is? And what does it mean to you?
Great question. I think it's important to me. I've sort of had my thinking around this shifted really recently. A professor of mine at Clark actually said recently, he was sort of talking about grants that he's applied for and like language that he uses when he's describing projects that he's interested in. And he said, like, I'm done using urban. Like, I think that he's like, I think it's kind of a buzzword that we use to maybe avoid naming more directly what the demographic is and who the demographic is that we're working with. And he's like, I actually just like, I no longer say like urban youth, I say like Black and brown youth. And I thought that was interesting. And I thought that was a good reminder that when we say urban, I think sometimes we mean things that we are afraid to say, or maybe don't feel like we know how to say. when really the reality of the situation is that this is a predominantly Black and brown school district. And when we say brown, we're talking about Latina students. And it's a mixed class, but predominantly low income school district, right? And so urban certainly is a descriptor for it, but I think it's important that we name the racial identity of our school district and the class-based identity as well, because our words matter. And yeah, I mean, that's how I'm sort of moving through that question right now.
What are some myths about urban education that you've heard in the past that are false? Did you believe any of these myths prior to teaching and like taking classes?
Yeah. Another great question. Did anyone, because you're from New York originally, did anyone know in your family or like friend group or like in your world, did people know about Worcester? I'm kind of putting this one back to you for a sec because I'm curious. Did people talk about Worcester when you mentioned that's where you were going? People definitely did it with me, but I think that's because I'm from Mass.
No. It wasn't until, not the cloud, another family member of mine, but I think someone did some research because originally when I like told people I was going to Holy Cross, I mean like Jesuit route, so my family was like, woohoo, you know? But as I was like starting to like, you know, tell people like, oh, like I'm going to go into education, one of my family members did some research and was like, I don't know if this is maybe somewhere you want to teach or if you want to stay because, you know, it's an urban school. So a lot of these kids don't want to put in the effort to do the work. So when I was told this, I was like, I mean, okay, that doesn't seem very accurate based on the observations that I've been like, you know, having. People already like kind of, I don't know, kind of undermine what these students are like actually really capable of. Like, yes, they definitely have some tough home lives, like, and they have very different experiences than like that I've had. But I don't know. I feel like we should be like giving like as much help and as much assistance to every student that we have in the classroom and not like give up on them, like kind of what we were talking about earlier. But like based on what like my family member was saying, I was like, oh, like that doesn't sound right. But also, why would someone assume that about students already if you haven't even worked with them or met them? So that was a myth that like I was told very early on before I even like had some education classes.
It's interesting because the same thing happened to me, and it actually happened more so because I grew up like 45 minutes away from Worcester, and my family is very much based, my dad's side at least, in Massachusetts. And it's interesting because I also, when I confirmed and like enrolled in Clark, I have like really vivid memories of family members. I'll also join you in calling in some family anonymously on this chat. No, it'll be fine. But I have a really vivid memory of like being at my grad party and like family members saying like, Worcester's a bad place. Worcester is like a place to be like wary of, be on your guard, like this really negative deficit lensed language to talk about this city that I think has gotten a really bad reputation and is thought of really poorly. And I even think it's interesting now. I'd be curious to like ask a first year here or at Clark, like it'd be interesting to find out if now their family members are saying what I hear folks saying about Worcester, like it's come so far, it's changed so much, Worcester's had such a facelift. I was right at like the turn of that discourse when I enrolled at Clark. And I think both are really problematic and deeply embedded in and coming from a place of racism and classism. But I think what's extra interesting about Worcester and like the myths around not just our district, but really like where I call home now is that there's such an ugliness to it that is different from how other urban spaces would be referred to. Like I don't ever hear the disdain when we're talking about New York City or Boston. And I still don't really have great answers besides like this comes from a racist and classist place. But I do think it's interesting that Worcester has earned this reputation as being especially not ideal or especially not desirable, when the reality of the situation is like there are all of Worcester really is just like not different from any other urban environment I've ever been in. And that includes the neighborhood that Holy Cross and Clark occupies, Main South, where I lived for years and moved into that off-campus apartment that I mentioned earlier. That includes the neighborhood I live in now, which looks very different, but is still part of Worcester, which is by Burncoat. And yeah, I mean, and I still hear myths that are specific to our school district a lot, again, from family and friends and people I love that, you know, need reminders that this is where I call home. And also, like, this isn't the reality. I think the biggest myth that I have an issue with is, and it's somewhat steeped in, I think, like a joke when like family says it, but like, oh, like you have to walk through a metal detector to get to school. And I'm just like, I know. And it's just like, first of all, no, I don't. And second of all, well, even if I did, like, who cares? Like, there are tons of different schools that do have that. And why should we, like, avoid them? Like, we were just talking about this too, right? Schools need great educators who are willing to work and learn with youth and great youth everywhere. And so I think it's deeply troubling, to say the least, when we hear narratives that spin Worcester in this way. And I think we have to be careful too, even sort of in the spaces that you and I are in schools like where we are now, and really any school that's situated in an urban environment, right, that's surrounded by sort of class and racial diversity, that we have to be careful not to be extractive as well.
How can we as educators debunk these myths on urban education? Yes,
we do this by having difficult dialogues and conversations with our family, right? You and I have talked a lot about how our family has disappointed us sometimes on this subject. But I think the more that you just get curious about, and this kind of goes back to like all great, like using dialogue for like a bunch of different like change work projects, I think that the more curious we get and ask, right, like there's a story here, right, about why you think Worcester is the way that it is, or why you think my school is the way that it is, and let's talk about it. I think like I've often been in a position where I get very defensive, and I mean, like that's certainly one way to do it, but I think that's succeeded in shutting down conversation and not really resulted in my family or like the person I'm talking to thinking any differently. And so part of what I'm excited and kind of hopeful about is that someone like that I have been referencing indirectly is watching this right now, because I think listening to people that have actually spent their time in those spaces in our classrooms, right? Like those are the sources of knowledge, and those are the folks most epistemically privileged to talk about their existence and to like talk about the ways that it's hard, because I think we can't pretend that it is perfect. And I think we just have to be careful about and intentional about who we're platforming to have those conversations, right? Like I'm not getting on this podcast to talk about all the ways that like my job is harder than it is in Holden, right? Holden Public Schools, but I wouldn't blame or like not air a young person who has spent their life in Worcester Public Schools, right? One of our students who gets on the mic and is like, I'm having a hard time with this, right? Like my life is hard. But I think for me, the work lies in just constantly bringing an asset lens to the conversation, because that's what I bring to the job. I love teaching, and I love teaching in Worcester, and there's no greater honor that I have than how I have spent my professional life since graduating from Clark and I guess re-enrolling. And it's because like there is just so much joy and there's so many incredible things that I have the privilege of watching, of being a part of like occasionally facilitating, but really like the youth are the ones that are driving the bus when that happens. And I just wish that more people would actually like go substitute a class or go volunteer, right? Actually, Worcester Public Schools needs subs. Where's the camera? All the time.
Sign up, please.
And the pay is like not that bad. And like if you want to like stand on business and be able to like talk about like what you think is wrong with what we do, then go do it. Like and see what you learn. What do you think? How do we do this?
Actually, shout out to Nina. We were just talking about this in the car.
Another student teacher.
Yeah. We were just talking about how like one of my family members is like, what you do is like not that hard. Yeah, I know.
No,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry,
It's
Fiona.
okay, it's
Someone
okay.
said that to you?
Yeah. This family member was like, I mean, like, you're just teaching instruction. Like, how hard could it be? And I was telling this to Nina in the car earlier, and Nina goes, they should go for the full 7 hours one day.
100%.
See what it's like.
Yeah.
Give it a shot.
Yeah.
And then have something to say.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
I was also talking about this, like with some family members and also like some family friends, because they were asking about like, oh, like how's student teaching when I was like home from break. And I was like, oh, like it's been really great. And then like one of my family friends was like, oh, like how are the students? And I was like, fantastic. What do you like? Seriously, all the kids have been great. And just because like they're going through, I feel like there's like this like preconceived notion of like no one wants to like put in the effort. Like these kids don't want to put in the effort. I'm like, that's not true. Not at all. These kids like show up to school every day, like ready to learn and like are excited to as well. Just because like they might come from like a different home life and like different like socioeconomic standing does not mean that they are not willing to put in that effort.
Yeah. Family friend, like, do you see how screwed up it is to connote that like that's what makes them like not want to work as hard or like not inclined to like do classwork? Like it's so unacceptable.
I know. But also having those tough conversations are also really needed. Yeah. I think after that conversation they walked away and they were like, oh, like I can understand now a little bit more. Because I mean, yeah, it definitely was really awkward because we were all at the dinner table and whatnot. But like it was a conversation that also needed to happen.
Yeah. Those are the moments, right, that I'm thinking of, like dinner table. Like I talked about my grad party, right? Like these big gatherings are where like people in our lives want to make small talk, and it's even harder in that way when it's not just you and the other person, but like we have sort of an obligation in some ways to be like communicative, like receivers and communicators of the joy that we like have access to. Like it's so fun to watch students sense make out of a story, right? And like engage in literature. And sometimes it's fun to like, maybe not in the moment, but it's rewarding and meaningful to help them through times where they're upset or times where they're thinking about something that is important. And you learn so much from that, right? Like in many ways, the young person is probably teaching you more than vice versa. Yeah. So we got to share all that with the folks that are too afraid, frankly, to be in a classroom.
If you grew up in an urban school, how did that experience influence your desire to teach in a similar setting? If you didn't grow up in an urban school, how did your own school experience influence the way you approach and teach in an urban setting?
I did not grow up in an urban school setting. I grew up so I went to school in Westwood, Massachusetts, Westwood Public. It is like 10 or 15 or 20-ish minutes outside of Boston. It's a Boston suburb. Thank you. It looks like, it just looks like a lot of the ways that like Boston suburbs look like in this state. Like it is an extremely affluent and extremely white district and community with some amazing property taxes that are taking very good care of those school buildings and those students, me. And yeah, that class and white privilege is a thing that I am definitely, though, reflecting on it. And in fact, we were also just talking about this, like you have to be reflective in this job all the time, almost regardless of where you call home, because your capacity to do harm, right, and to screw up is profound in like any human service role, but like almost especially in teaching. And the hard part is not getting like caught up in the guilt or the like frustration or disappointment in yourself when you screw up, right? And to not take things personally, which is really like, these are all easier said than done things. I feel tremendously grateful to my professors at Clark, current and former, who do an incredible job as critical theorists of education and practitioners, who make students of all walks of life, but certainly ones, right, that carry class-based and white privilege, to think really hard about what that means when you walk into a classroom where most of the skin tones do not match yours, right, if any of them. And most of like the home lives, right, don't necessarily match what yours looked like. And it's fascinating to think about all the ways that right down to like giving directions, right? That can be different, right? Like Lisa Delpit has all that great. We've talked a lot about her work with like even just giving directions, right? As when you come from middle or upper middle class backgrounds, right? It's framed, it's couched as this question of like, where do the scissors go? But when like it's found, right, that when it's from a predominantly lower income or non-white home life, right? It's like, it's direct and it's authentic and it's like the scissors need to be put away, right? Like you need to go put the scissors away. And so that's just one really small example of ways that I have had my thinking stretched and my sort of practice stretched. And it's just a thing that you sort of have to be aware of. And it's a thing you can't be afraid to talk about with your students. Like you need to show them, especially as a white teacher, right, that you are committed to social and racial justice, but that you are also committed to having difficult conversations about when you might make a mistake, when you don't know something and you want to know more. And when you're willing to have those conversations, students notice and students might not show you in the moment, but they do appreciate it. A question we haven't really talked much about, you identify as biracial, right? How do you see that coming up this is like month 2 for you, but you've been watching my classes for a while now, and you've spent a lot of time in BMS at this point. Do you feel differences and similarities? Do you feel sort of, where does this work live for you in your background with teaching as well, but also sort of your social identity and positionality?
I grew up in a very different environment than these kids that currently do. I also grew up in a predominantly white, also very affluent suburb outside of New York City. So again, very different life. I mean, very different education system as well. Same with like insane taxes that go straight to the school. So I had a lot of opportunities and a lot of resources, a lot of which these kids do not have. So it's a very different experience that I grew up with. But for context, I'm half Chinese. But I don't know, actually, now that I think about it.
I mean, I ask because I think we've had really cool and inspiring moments where students have picked up on your racial identity or sensed that it's not the same as mine. And they'll ask you, right? Like, I think you've been asked if you're Puerto Rican before. You've been asked if you...
Filipino, Taiwanese, which is really not funny, but like, I did not have that at all growing up. We had something, 5th grade, we had something called cultural like student day or something like that. And one of my teachers like went around and was like, oh, like, what is your ethnicity to all the kids? My turn comes up. I say I'm half Chinese and everyone goes, really? They all thought I was white.
Wow.
So, which was really like interesting when all these kids, when I first met them, mind you, they're like, oh, like, what's your ethnicity? And I still like get this question, like, even like I got it last week actually. But they all are like at least guessing that like I'm biracial. Whereas like growing up, I never got that. No one clocked it.
Yeah.
No one got that.
I think that's deep.
Yeah, it is. I feel like they're maybe more aware of it than maybe some other kids like back in my hometown. Whereas
100%.
like, no, I don't really think I think there was maybe one other girl who was actually on my street. Maybe at least that I was aware of that was biracial. Now I think about it, because I grew up in a predominantly white school. Yeah. So I think maybe that's like other people assume that I was too, which is obviously not true. But
or felt like they didn't have to think about race, right? Because of whiteness and because of homogeneity. Yeah.
Last question. What has been an important lesson that you've learned from working in an urban school that you would share with other teachers or those who are maybe interested in teaching or education as a whole?
What I would want people to know is that it's hard to be a teacher, period. It's hard to be in education, period. And I think I don't know, sometimes I actually don't even believe this truth. And like, I struggle to like think that it's true, but I think it is true. I think that no matter where you teach, it's still hard. It's just different. Yeah. And I think that I'm tired of pretending, or I'm tired of like believing almost that like what we do is so much harder because of socioeconomic differences, because of challenges with like resource versus like under-resourced, well-resourced, right? We talked a little bit about that with our differences in what we've done with school. But I think the balance and the tricky part is like finding a way to acknowledge that, like, yes, the difference can make it harder sometimes, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still hard to teach in a predominantly white, predominantly affluent suburb like Westwood, actually. And I think that no matter where you are doing this work and no matter at what level, right? Like this goes for higher ed as well. I think sometimes I'm really guilty of like looking at like professor friends and being like, oh, they have it so easy. They teach like 3 classes, maybe at most a semester, like a year, right? Mm-hmm. And it's so nice. And I wish I had that life. But the reality is that like our country does not value education enough for it to be considered fair or like well paid or compensated or well resourced, almost no matter where you go. And so I say this to sort of to put it on everyone's radar that like, one, like stop with the deficit lens on like urban ed, right? Or education in a predominantly Black and brown low income Title I school district, but also like don't dismiss the hard work that educators are doing everywhere else and at every level. And I think sometimes we as educators get caught up in like looking at whose job is easier and whose job is better resourced, right, or better paid. And we lose the solidarity that we need to have to look at sort of the bigger fights that are ahead of us, short-term and long-term in this country. And yeah, I guess that's a big lesson. I mean, I also, people are going to watch this and be like, well, like he's never taught in like non-urban school district. And they're right. And that's fair. And maybe I would go and be like, oh, like this is like completely different. I disavow everything I just said, but I'm kind of inclined to believe that like it's just a different hard.
I agree with that personally. I was actually talking with this family friend about their school district, or at least what my old like school district used to be like. Mind you, she's a sophomore in high school, and she was talking about how like this teacher has like no classroom management, because even if like the teachers do call home at the end of the day to say like, hey, your student's doing this, this, and this, parents gonna like write back an angry email, get the administration involved. Oh, no. It's a very different kind of hard. Very different. Like, but yes, I can understand how challenging that is. Like, I'm sure like it's frustrating. And she was talking about how this one particular teacher is like constantly frustrated with the class because they can never get as much as like he wants to done. But he also can't call these students out and like be like, oh, like I'm gonna write home, because he knows that the parents are either A, not gonna do much, or B, calling like all the administration to like come and talk to this teacher about it. So it's a very different kind of hard, I would have to say. And like some people say like, oh, that's easier, but like also I haven't lived through that either. It's not an experience that I've had. So I would like kind of go back to what you're saying, like teaching in like any kind of school district is just hard, flat out. Yeah. I mean, you're trying to get as much instruction as you can, but there might be different circumstances with each school and each class as well. So very different. Every kind of, I think, district has its own struggles, but as teachers, we're supposed to just do as best we can.
I think you're right. I think like that story is a great example of how the heart is different, right? And I think like in a roundabout sort of way, like when we, even like well-meaning folks that I know that like want to be good sort of allies to the struggle of like urban public school teachers, which I greatly appreciate their efforts. But I think like we sort of almost like feed into the deficit lens that people like our unnamed family members bring to this narrative, right? Of like, this isn't a place you'd want to be, when we act like that's the only hard. So it's a hard balancing act we have to walk, but it's just one of many things we can do because we're teachers. We can do it.
Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to add, something maybe you're thinking about or a story you want to leave people with before we wrap up?
Thanks. I thank you to Holy Cross too for this amazing, this has been such a whirlwind of a day. We've spent way more time in this building than I think we thought we were going to, which is totally fine. But I'm glad that we made this happen despite the craziness.
Yeah. Thank you again, Brett, for joining us on Worcester Voices. And for our listeners, I want to remind you that community is something we create together when we stay curious, lead with compassion, and choose connection. Thank you so much.